Time is a function of where you are. You know what? Time is a function of where you are. If you're in a activated state, then to sit for half an hour will be a long time, right? If you're in an activated state, right? If you're upset, to sit for 5 minutes is a lot, right? When you're in a more relaxed, calm state, time goes faster now because you're not waiting anymore. You're not trying to get somewhere. You're not trying to control anything. You're just letting it be the way it is. And when you let life be the way it is, when you let time be the way it is, it actually disappears because it doesn't exist in the first place. If you let time be the way it is, it actually disappears because it doesn't exist in the first place. And because you're not paying attention to time, there is no time. If you're not paying attention to time, there is no time. That's why when you're completely involved and engaged in something, right, that you have to give your full attention to, do you ever notice that when you're doing something like that, time seems to disappear? It doesn't seem to be any time. Right? So time only exists when you give attention to time, when you're aware of time. And one of the times you're aware of time is when you practice meditation, right? Because when you practice meditation, it puts you in a situation in which the way the mind deals with practicing meditation is it tries to meditate. It tries not to do what's happening when you're trying to meditate. It tries not to do what's happening when you're trying to meditate. In other words, it tries to stop thinking. It tries to relax. Of course, trying to relax is not relaxation. That causes stress, right? So when you sit in meditation, typically what happens for people is you bring the mind to a sudden stop. You bring everything to a sudden stop. You've been moving around in the world and you come in here and your mind is going as it usually does, from one thing to another. It's moving, it's moving, it's moving. Your body's moving, you're moving in the world. And then all of a sudden you come and you sit down and all that comes to a sudden stop. The body's not moving, you're not talking to anybody, you're not interacting with anybody, but the mind is still going at the same rate. So now you're sitting still and the mind's still going at the same rate, and that starts sending signals to the body of restlessness. Don't want to sit still, I want something to happen, I want to talk, I want to move. These are the ways that we normally interact with the world. So all of that comes to a sudden stop, and when that comes to a sudden stop, one of the things the mind does is it begins to pay attention to time, doesn't it? Because everything comes to a sudden stop, and now I'm experiencing restlessness, and whenever you're uncomfortable, you pay more attention to time, don't you? Yeah, whenever you're uncomfortable, you pay more attention to time. Why? Because you're waiting for it to stop. You want to get it over with, right? And so that's a common situation in meditation for people to find themselves paying attention to time. And it's very common when I listen to people who are new at meditation. For those of you who have been here, you've heard this. You've heard newcomers say this. Well, how long do you sit? Well, about 10 minutes. What do you mean about 10 minutes? Well, maybe eight minutes. When it was close to 10 minutes, I stopped. Even people who I tell that the way you practice meditation, if you're going to do it correctly, is you practice for a precise amount of time. That's part of what it means to practice. You practice for precise amount of time. Even people that I tell that to, when I'm reviewing with them their practice, they say, well, and I say, how long have you been sitting recently? Well, I figured it was close to 10 minutes, so I stopped. Okay. And what they're reporting is that they were keeping track of time, right? And when they were keeping track of time, it was like, okay, how much time has passed now? I think if I was going to sit for 10 minutes, maybe it's about 8 minutes. That's good, that's good. That's good, that's close. That's how people do everything, right? People do everything in a way in which it's more comfortable, right? So how do you practice meditation in a way it's more comfortable? Don't do it as long as don't do it for the full 10 minutes. Then you don't suffer as much, right? Because the conclusion that the person makes when they begin to sit in meditation, and this is why most people don't succeed in meditation, the conclusion they make when they begin to sit in meditation is, I don't like this. I don't like this. No, this is uncomfortable. This is restless. This is restless. I can't stop my mind. I'm uncomfortable. What's next? How long has it been? When will this end? Why am I doing this? Why isn't this easier? And that's why people typically say when they're new, well, how do I control my mind, right? Because I found myself sitting here with this voice in my head that won't stop talking, and it's driving me crazy. Well, the only difference between then and every other time is that every other time you're being crazy instead of noticing that you're crazy, right? That's the only difference. That's why it doesn't bother you when you're walking around in the world and that voice in your head is being crazy all the time, right? Why? Well, that doesn't bother you because that's just me living my life. That's just me living my life. And the reason that I'm crazy is because they're making me crazy. People are making me crazy. My children are doing it. My wife's doing it. Strangers are doing it. People that are driving in front of me when I'm driving my car are doing it. The world's making me crazy. I watch the news. It's making me crazy. Everybody's making me crazy. That's why I'm crazy. And that's why the voice in my head says what it says. And that's life, and that's normal, and everybody's living the same life. That's why I need a drink. So when you practice meditation, you're bringing all that to a sudden stop. All at once, that comes to a sudden stop. And now you're sitting there, right, and you're controlling your body. You're not moving on purpose. You're not making any sound. But you can't do anything about the voice in your head. It just keeps going, keeps going, keeps going. And it starts sending signals to the body, restlessness, restlessness. I don't like this. This is uncomfortable. How long is this going to last? What's this mean? Why am I doing this? Right? And that's why people ask questions like, well, how long do I have to practice this before it gets easy? Right? How long do I have to practice this before I'm not suffering when I'm doing it? Right? Well, I don't have an answer to that question. It's different for different people, right? But I can tell you that it will take less time if you stop resisting. It will take less time if you keep sitting there trying to do something. It will take a lot longer if you're trying not to be restless, if you're trying not to think. If you're trying not to be uncomfortable, it'll take a lot longer. And so one of the things that works in practicing meditation, other than understanding that the consistency is absolutely necessary, and to do it for a specific period of time is absolutely necessary. But the other thing that makes a difference if you want to really become a successful meditation practitioner is to give up, to surrender, to stop resisting it, to stop trying to control anything. It's really a great discovery. It's really a fantastic discovery when you realize that if you sit it out, if you just keep practicing and you keep noticing that awareness that's not moving, that awareness that's always still, that's always silent, if you keep practicing and you keep noticing that, it's an amazing discovery to come to the place where you realize, right, that you can experience that anytime, and that's actually what you are. You can experience that at any time, and that's actually what you are. It's actually possible to be in situations in life where there is a lot of challenge going on. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of activity going on, right? It's actually possible to be in situations like that and at the exact same time experience the stillness and the calmness of awareness. That's mastery. That's what the word mastery means. Stillness in the midst of activity is what mastery is. To be able to be aware of yourself as the awareness that doesn't move and never changes and is unaffected by everything that's happening. To experience yourself as that awareness that never moves and never changes, no matter what's happening and how much action is occurring, is a magnificent discovery to make, to discover that that's possible. And that there is a way of being in the world in which you can experience, in the midst of activity, experience calmness, experience peace of mind. And the key to that is not just in the practice of meditation, which is part of it, but the key to that is to understand. The key to that is to understand what's possible, to understand that there is this experience of life and there is this experience of who you are that becomes available when you sit still, that becomes available when you stop paying attention to the thought process, becomes available, and you begin to see that it's there all the time. It's always been there. And you discover what it's like to really relax. Not just relax physically, but to relax mentally. To relax mentally. A lot of people live their entire life and they never experience what it's like to relax mentally. And what I mean by that is what it's like to practice sitting still and being quiet and being aware consistently over time in such a way that the voice in your head naturally begins to become still, naturally begins to settle down, naturally begins to become more quiet. And if you persist in practicing meditation over time, you'll gradually begin to notice that the space in your head gets quieter. Yes? Yeah, the space in your head gets quieter. The voice in your head speaks less, has less to say. And the reason that becomes the case is because the voice in your head, first of all, is at some point understood not to be you. The voice in your head at some point becomes understood not to be you. And then after it's understood that it's not you, it starts to become understood that it's crazy a lot of the time. And so the idea that it's not you is good news, right? Because it's crazy a lot of the time, and before you found out it wasn't you, you were crazy a lot of the time. And then to make that worse, you had to hide your craziness from other people. That's what most people are doing, you know. That's what most people are doing. If you could read the minds of people around you as you walk through your life, right, you would hear the craziness that people are trying to hide. You would hear the voice in their head, just like the one you have in your head, right? And you know from the one in your head that it's crazy, right? It's constantly concerned about everything. It's constantly afraid of everything. It's constantly annoyed by most everything. It never rests. It's judging and evaluating everything. And if you could hear that voice in everybody's head as you walked around, right, you would go hide in a cave. You would go hide in a cave. It's bad enough you got to listen to the one in your head, right? Sometimes you run into people on the street that are psychotic, right? And they're talking to themselves, you know, when somebody is psychotic and they're having a mental breakdown, and they put the voice in their head on outer speaker, right? And you listen to what they're saying, which is what you're thinking, most people are thinking, but they're saying it. You listen to what they're saying, you say, oh my God, that person's crazy. And yet what they're saying is what's going on in your head all day long, right? And so part of your job to be civilized, is to keep it a secret that you're crazy, right? Keep it a secret that you're crazy. So you have to be careful what you say. You don't want people to realize that you're crazy. And everybody's playing the hide being crazy game. Everybody's playing the hide being crazy game. And so you have to figure out how to control yourself. You have to figure out what not to say, right? You have to figure out what not to say. You have to figure out how to keep people from finding out how crazy you really are and how afraid you really are. And that burns up a lot of your energy, doesn't it? Burns up a lot of your energy because you're thinking about thinking now. You're thinking about thinking. You're thinking about what you shouldn't think and what you should think and what you should say and what you shouldn't say and what you should do and what you shouldn't do and what you should feel and what you shouldn't feel. That's called neurotic. That's what neurosis is. Neurosis is thinking about what's happening. Neurosis is thinking what's happening and constantly judging and evaluating it because most of the time it's not okay. That's neurosis. Thinking about what's happening and constantly judging and evaluating what's happening because most of the time that's not okay. Isn't it? But it's so normal, it is such a constant normal thing that everybody's doing, right? That nobody notices how crazy it is, right? You listen to people talk. The primary thing that people do when they communicate with one another is complain. Isn't it true? Yeah. The primary thing that you do in your own head is complain. And the primary you do with other people is complain. Right? And yet, while we're doing that all the time, we are not aware of the craziness of it. Right? We're not aware of the craziness of it. Because if you stop and examine it, you can see what's the point? What's the point of telling people what you think about how it should be? And listen to them tell you what they think about how it should be. What's the point? Isn't that crazy on the face of it? Isn't it crazy on the face of it? So when you practice meditation, what happens is you begin to notice that you're not the voice in your head, and that the voice in your head is crazy a lot of the time, and therefore you should get a divorce. Therefore you should break up your relationship with that voice. You should stop being that voice so you could stop being crazy. And now that you've discovered that you're not that voice, you can pay attention to it, and when it's being crazy, you can stop participating. You can stop participating when it's crazy. When it's being crazy, you can stop getting involved. Even in the situation that you're talking about, right? Complaining means you think this shouldn't be happening. The problem with it is that it is happening. And if it is happening and you think it shouldn't be happening, and therefore you're suffering because it is happening and it shouldn't be happening, right? That's what complaining generates, right? On the other hand, if you see something that's not workable, right, and it is happening, and you accept that it is happening, right, therefore it shouldn't not be happening because it is happening, and you communicate about whatever there is to communicate about in order to change it so it's more functional, you didn't have to suffer the whole time. Yeah, well, that's what I mean when I say to break up your relationship with the crazy voice in your head. That you notice when it's complaining, right? And you stop being interested. Because why? Because it's causing you suffering. Because all of that stuff that you were still running around, still running in your head, isn't happening. Therefore, you're not living, you're not here, you're not experiencing your life. You're experiencing an alternative version of your life that's not happening. That you were still being affected by the situations that you experience today. Yeah, well, that's common, right? That, you know, this is what happens in the mind. Something happens, it's upsetting, it's disturbing, right? There's nothing, see, this is the thing. There's nothing you can do about that at that time, right? Because emotions just happen, thoughts just happen. You're a stimulus response machine. There's nothing you can do about it at that time, right? And so if you understand the way reality works, You recognize, I'm feeling these feelings right now, I'm having these thoughts right now, okay. That's what's happening. And even that shouldn't be different, right? But after I notice these feelings and these thoughts, right? And the initial feeling that came up when I had a reaction now passes, but I am still reverberating in that energy. Oh, why did that happen? I don't want that to happen again. I'm going to do everything I can do. Oh, that lady wasn't nice to me. I should write a letter about that. This is really shouldn't be this way. Life sucks and then you die. You know, the voice in your head keeps reverberating this negative reality. And that's the insanity. That's the craziness. And it'll cure itself if you pay attention, because this is the key. It'll cure itself if you pay attention, because anything that you shine the light of awareness on, right, naturally reorients itself to be realistic. Anything you shine the light of awareness allows you to see what's actually happening, right? When you shine the light of awareness on the voice in your head, you see what's actually happening. You're no longer identifying with it, right? And just because you're now aware that you're participating in something that's causing you to suffer, that awareness is all that's necessary for you to stop doing that. Doesn't that make sense? Yeah, if you keep noticing that, one of the things that happens when you start to wake up and you pay attention is you start noticing patterns. You start noticing patterns. You start noticing them with the people that you're closest to. They say certain things and you behave the same way you always did when they said that, right? They say certain things and you behave the way you always did when they said that. That's a pattern, right? So you start noticing the patterns and you start realizing, well, this is just happening. I'm not intentionally doing what I do. I'm not intentionally saying what I'm saying. This is just happening. This is all mechanical. What's going on? Something's controlling my life. Something's making me behave. Something's making me say things. Something's making me feel ways that I don't want to feel. That's the beginning of waking up, and you start realizing these patterns. And you start realizing if they're patterns and they're mechanical and they're automatic, then unless you do something about it, unless you wake up, unless you start to pay attention and see it for what it is, that's going to be the rest of your life. That's going to be what your life is. That's what this is all about, right? This is about coming out of the trance, realizing that your life is going to continue to be suffering, and it's not going to end well unless you wake up, unless you practice being who you are and stop practicing being lost in the sauce like most of humanity. So that's the message, right? That's the message. Everything I've ever said here, everything that I've ever talked about in terms of meditation has always been the same message, right? Same message. Wake up before it's too late. Wake up before it's too late. Or at least pay attention to what's going on so that you realize that you better wake up before it's too late. Right? All right. I think that's enough for one night.